What we've been told for decades is that fiber is good for digestion. Usually, that's where the conversation ends. It helps keep things moving. Simple enough. But what if that's only a small part of the story? What if one of the most powerful ways to support your energy, resilience, and even the way you age begins with something inside you that you can't see? The truth is, your body doesn't actually digest fiber for energy. Instead, fiber becomes food for something else entirely: the vast community of microbes living inside your gut, known as the gut microbiome. So every time you eat fiber-rich foods, you're doing more than feeding yourself. You're nourishing trillions of tiny living organisms that quietly influence your health every single day. One helpful way to picture this is to imagine your gut as a living rainforest. A healthy rainforest thrives because many different species coexist, each playing its own role. That diversity creates stability. Your gut works much the same way. It contains trillions of microbes, mostly bacteria, living together in a remarkably complex ecosystem that has been with you throughout your life. When you're younger, this community is often more resilient. But as the years pass, like many systems in the body, it can gradually lose balance. Some helpful microbes become less abundant, while others begin to dominate. And when that happens, the effects reach far beyond digestion. They can influence your energy, your immune system, your mood, and even how clearly you think. That's why the familiar advice to eat more fiber deserves a much bigger explanation. Fiber isn't simply helping food move through the digestive tract. It's providing the nourishment this internal ecosystem depends on to stay healthy. And that brings us to one of the most fascinating discoveries in modern biology. Your gut and your brain are constantly communicating. Scientists call this the gut-brain axis. One of its most important communication pathways is the vagus nerve, which creates a direct connection between your brain and your digestive system. Signals travel back and forth all day long. Your gut microbes help shape many of those signals. You may have heard that around 90 to 95% of the body's serotonin is produced in the gut. That's true, but there's an important detail. That serotonin doesn't simply travel into the brain. Instead, it works closer to home. It influences the nervous system within the gut, interacts with the immune system, and contributes to communication through the vagus nerve. Your microbes also produce tiny compounds called short-chain fatty acids, often shortened to SCFAs, when they ferment dietary fiber. Three of the most important are butyrate, acetate, and propionate. These compounds help keep the lining of your gut healthy, support a balanced immune response, and send signals that indirectly influence brain function through metabolic and nervous system pathways. Put simply, they help strengthen your gut's protective barrier while encouraging a calmer, more balanced internal environment. This becomes especially important after the age of 50. As we grow older, the body becomes more vulnerable to a slow, persistent form of inflammation that researchers often call inflammaging. Unlike the inflammation that follows an injury, this process usually develops quietly over many years. It can gradually affect energy, joint health, cognitive function, and the body's ability to recover from everyday stress. A well-supported gut microbiome is one of the factors that helps keep this process under better control. When your microbes regularly receive fiber from a wide range of plant foods, they produce more of those beneficial compounds, helping maintain the gut barrier and support healthy immune regulation. The result isn't a dramatic overnight transformation. It's something much more valuable. A body that gradually becomes more stable and resilient from the inside out. At this point, it's easy to assume that improving gut health requires complicated meal plans, counting nutrients, or tracking every gram of fiber. Fortunately, that's not the case. A much more practical approach is surprisingly simple. Instead of chasing perfection, aim for variety. Rather than focusing on what to eliminate, gradually expand the range of plant foods you enjoy. Over time, those small additions give your gut ecosystem exactly what it needs to adapt and flourish. This idea is supported by research, including findings from the American Gut Project. Researchers noticed that people who regularly ate a wider variety of plant foods tended to have richer, more diverse gut microbiomes than those whose diets stayed relatively narrow. You've probably heard the number before. About 30 different plant foods each week. At first, that sounds overwhelming. But it doesn't mean 30 elaborate meals. Plant foods include vegetables, fruits, beans, lentils, whole grains, nuts, seeds, herbs, and spices. A handful of walnuts. A spoonful of chia seeds. A sprinkle of cinnamon. They all count. One modern trend deserves a little caution. Some people try to dramatically increase their fiber by relying on supplements or heavily processed fiber products. An approach sometimes called fiber maxing. Supplements certainly have their place. They can be useful during medical recovery or when someone has specific dietary limitations. But they aren't the same as eating whole plant foods. Whole foods provide not only fiber, but also polyphenols, vitamins, minerals, and countless naturally occurring compounds that help support a healthier microbial community. Fiber is only part of the package. There are also a few common mistakes worth avoiding. The first is increasing fiber too quickly. Your gut needs time to adjust, and sudden changes can lead to bloating or discomfort. The second is eating the same high-fiber foods every day. Your microbes thrive on variety, not repetition. The third is trying to make up for several days of poor eating with one exceptionally healthy meal. Your gut responds far better to steady habits than occasional bursts of effort. And finally, remember that fiber works best alongside adequate hydration. Water helps your digestive system handle fiber comfortably and effectively. Of course, there are situations where a gentler approach is appropriate. People living with conditions such as IBS, inflammatory bowel disease, or those recovering from abdominal surgery may tolerate fiber differently. In those cases, choosing well-tolerated foods and following professional medical guidance is the safest path. For most people, though, supporting the gut doesn't have to be complicated. You might start with a bowl of oats and simply add blueberries, flaxseed, and chia seeds. One familiar breakfast suddenly becomes a meal that nourishes a much broader range of microbes. Choosing whole fruit instead of fruit juice preserves the natural fiber. Lentils and chickpeas provide both fiber and protein. Whole grains like quinoa or brown rice add even more variety. Nuts and seeds contribute another layer, even in small amounts. One simple habit can make a meaningful difference. Try adding just one new plant food each week. It doesn't have to be unusual or expensive. It might simply be a vegetable you've forgotten about or an herb you rarely use. The goal isn't perfection. It's gentle expansion. Over time, those small choices shape the living ecosystem inside you, and that ecosystem quietly helps shape you in return. Good health later in life rarely comes from extreme changes or rigid rules. More often, it's built through simple habits repeated consistently, allowing your body's own biology to work with you instead of against you. In a very real sense, the person you'll become years from now is already being influenced by the choices you make today, including the way you nourish the remarkable community living inside your body. If today's conversation gave you a new way to think about health, we'd love to have you join us again. And if someone you care about might find this helpful, consider sharing it with them. Here at Thrive Beyond 50, we're simply exploring practical, science-backed ways to build a stronger body, a calmer mind, and a sharper life, one thoughtful choice at a time. Thank you for spending this time with us today.